The far edge of the Helios Drift was a graveyard of twisted metal and abandoned hopes. A place where star maps grew vague and no one bothered to look twice. It was there that veteran salvage Captain Jonah Reeve guided his battered recovery ship through the frozen remains of vessels that had once carried dreams instead of debris. After 23 years in the trade, he had learned a brutal truth of the galaxy. Tragedy didn't disappear. It just changed owners. And if you were careful, you could make a living sifting through the wreckage. His sensors chirped lazily as they catalogued the usual worthless scrap. Burnt hull plating, ruptured cargo pods, the hollow shells of colony transports stripped long ago. But then one reading made him stiffen in his chair. A signal that wasn't metallic or mechanical, but biological, weak and fading. Jonah frowned because nothing alive should exist this far from stable space, millions of kilometers from the nearest station where even hardened pacers avoided lingering. He altered course, fretting his ship between the skeletal ribs of a shattered freighter. As the signal grew stronger, his breath caught. Drifting in the black, half-curled against the broken remains of an escape pod, was a woman, her body rimed with frost. Dark hair floated like ink in water, skin pale with oxygen deprivation, exposed directly to vacuum, and by every known law of human biology, she should have been a corpse for weeks. Yet his instruments insisted her heart was still beating. Jonah deployed the recovery arm with hands that trembled despite decades of experience. He had recovered bodies before, too many to count, but never someone balanced so precariously between life and death. As the mechanical claws drew her into the airlock and pressure slowly returned, warmth flooding the chamber, she gasped violently, arching as if dragged back from drowning, amber eyes snapping open wide with terror before locking onto him. "You're human," she rasped, voice raw and cracked. "So are you," Jonah replied gently, wrapping her in emergency thermal blankets while his mind raced. "What happened out there?" She stared past him for a moment before answering in a flat, empty tone that chilled him more than the void outside. "They abandoned me." The words carried no drama, no accusation, just fact. Over the days that followed, as Jonah's ship limped toward the nearest outpost, he learned her name was Lara Quinn, an engineer aboard the colony vessel Horizon's Wake. One of 300 souls bound for a distant world that never came because pirates had torn the ship apart in minutes. When the alarm screamed and escape pods became scarce, the captain and senior officers had decided who was worth saving, sealing off lower decks and condemning engineers, technicians, and passengers alike. Lara had fought her way to a single damaged pod and launched herself into space with failing life support rather than die, waiting for oxygen to run out in the dark. She explained it all without emotion, even showing Jonah the crude surgical scars along her ribs where she had done something no sane person would attempt. Reprogramming medical nanites in her bloodstream from an old injury to shut down non-essential systems and preserve her core functions at any cost, essentially turning herself into a barely living system waiting for rescue. When Jonah stared at her in disbelief and told her it was insane, she only met his gaze steadily and said she was already dying. So at least this way the choice had been hers. As she recovered, she revealed a mind that made Jonah quietly nod. Within a week, she had increased the ship's efficiency by nearly a third, using nothing but salvaged parts, redesigned power distribution, optimized navigation software, and even fixed a coffee maker that had defeated him for 3 years. Yet for all her brilliance, she moved through life like a machine, working until exhaustion forced her to stop, eating only when reminded, sleeping without rest. One evening, when Jonah finally asked why she drove herself so relentlessly, she hesitated and said she needed to be useful, because usefulness was the only value she understood, admitting quietly that when resources became scarce, her skills and her life had not been enough to save her. Jonah recognized that look instantly, the hollow stare of survivors who didn't believe they deserved to be alive. Months passed like that until everything changed. They intercepted a desperate distress signal from a medical transport spiraling toward a gas giant in Typhon Vale. Its engines dead, orbit decaying, 47 patients and staff with only hours to live. Jonah diverted course without hesitation, knowing his ship wasn't built for rescue, calculating trajectories with calm precision. When they arrived, it became clear the situation was worse than expected. There was no time for multiple trips. The only way to save everyone was to restart the transport's engines manually by bypassing safety systems in a radiation-flooded compartment that would deliver a lethal dose in under 2 minutes. Jonah flatly refused, but Lara looked at him with real emotion blazing in her eyes, telling him that her whole life she had been treated as expendable. From the orphanage to the corporations to the colony ship, she believed she was a replaceable cog, until he had pulled her from the void and treated her like a person simply because she existed. She told him she finally understood her purpose. Not to prove her worth, but to choose it. Saving those people was her choice. Not because she thought her life meant nothing, but because she knew it did. And when she smiled at him, it transformed her face. Jonah realized he had never truly seen her smile before. The next hour blurred into frantic preparation. Jonah searched desperately for alternatives that didn't exist because math was cruel and honest. When suited up in heavy radiation gear, Lara thanked him for showing her she mattered. He wanted to stop her, to lock the airlock, to steal her choice. But he saw the peace and certainty in her eyes and knew he had no right. Over the radio, he listened to her calm voice as she rerouted power, bypassed safeties, and brought the engines roaring back to life, stabilizing the orbit and saving 47 lives. When they recovered her body afterward, she wore that same peaceful smile. Jonah cremated her remains and scattered them in the Helios Drift where he had found her among forgotten wreckage, knowing the galaxy would move on as it always did. But 47 people would live because one woman had chosen to matter and because one human had refused to treat a piece of wreckage like junk ever again. Please follow my channel for more videos. One click from you can change my life.